planet Yadaraf was far beyond the outer limits of the Federation's domain, a free world frequented by space travelers from all walks of life. The Crotus spaceport occupied an entire island and was vital to the natives of Yadaraf for survival, providing essential communications and trade with other planets. On the southern shores of the spaceport was a sprawling breaker's yard. Countless rusting wrecks of air, land, sea, and spacecraft were gathered here, gradually being stripped down for materials and parts by Yadarafian scrappers. The sandy soil was polluted with fuel and peppered with metal and plastic debris of all shapes and sizes. Sulin, wearing figure-hugging but practical grey overalls, watched as a crane lifted a scorched Starburst-class Federation pursuit ship from the back of the anti-grav truck. It would certainly never fly again, but the engine was intact, and that was the deal-breaker. The crane lowered the hulk to the ground. The crane's operator, grimy, muscular, and somewhere in his 60s, climbed out of the cabin and walked over to Sulin.
Parts for a Wanderer-class planet hopper, wasn't it?
He recognized Sulin. She'd been here before. That's right.
Is your Dorian still tinkering with that crate of his? We've probably got better round here if you want to trade.
The man was only half joking. It's his pride and joy. She rolled her eyes.
I've not seen him recently. He's well, I take it.
He's over at Crotus picking up supplies, lied Sulin.
Want me to show you where the Wanderer-class wrecks are?
No, it's all right. I know the way. Just before the Venators. Sulin winked at the breaker. She walked over to the anti-grav truck and climbed up into the driving seat. She was soon on her way through the maze of towering derelicts. Elsewhere, in one of Crotus's many crowded bars, locals and off-worlders, mostly humanoid, but some more exotic, ate, chatted, and drank. The venue was lit with neon signs advertising products sold at the counters. A cloud of smoke, an amalgam of fumes from a variety of narcotics, hung in the air. Villa Restel had been attempting to converse with a large, brutish being called Gurk. He wasn't getting very far. The place was too loud, and the man, who seemed to be a few evolutionary steps up from a Neanderthal, didn't seem to understand half of what he'd been saying. Villa picked up his glass of ale from the table, the glass briefly clinging to the tacky black surface. He looked about the crowded, noisy room as he sipped on the zesty, gingery ale. He liked it here. It made a change from his usual company. Perhaps he should just slip away into the crowd and disappear. His attention was brought back to the ruffian opposite him when he slammed something on the table. It was a silvery, grey case with a handle that folded out to make it easier to carry. This was why Villa was here.
May I?
Gurk grunted, and Villa opened the two clasps that held the case shut. Inside was an Aladdin's cave of lock-picking tools, each neatly slotted into its own compartment. Some he had already, some he had never seen before. He quickly closed the lid to prevent prying eyes from spying the contents. The trader held up 4 fingers and a thumb.
50? How about 20?
He placed 2 coins on top of the case. This time the seller shook his head, frowning. Then he held up 4 fingers.
30?
The chunky teleport bracelet on his wrist began to vibrate.
Not now, Sulin,
he thought. Flustered, he dropped 4 coins on the case. The rogue smiled, displaying a horrific lack of dental hygiene, and pushed the case towards Villa. He took it, and the coins slid off onto the tabletop.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
He maneuvered his way through the crowd, out onto the main concourse. The trader scooped up the coins and pocketed them. He tapped on the cracked, grubby glass screen of a communicator on his thick, hairy wrist. A list of names appeared. He selected one and made a call, flashing an ugly smile at the unfortunate woman on the small screen.
Jagris. Cindy.
Scorpio was parked alongside other spacecraft in Quartus's docks. Some were modern, state-of-the-art affairs, but most had seen a lot of space miles. Sulin had parked the anti-grav truck in Scorpio's cargo hold. It was loaded with an assortment of bulky but essential parts for the Scorpio, which were exchanged for the remains of the pursuit ship, no questions asked. Having ensured that all was secured, she casually walked down the ramp from the cargo hold, sat and waited. She watched as spacefarers came and went, getting on with their lives. It was a dusty, warm, yellow-tinted, sunny day. A small robot train wound its way towards Scorpio through the crowds and spacecraft. It came from the spaceport's mega-market. The front was designed to look something like a humanoid. At least, there was a head, with 2 eyes and a torso. Behind it were 3 pallets, which floated, like the robot driver, using anti-gravs. Sitting amongst the crates and packages was Villa. He jumped off when the train came to a halt.
I think this is everything we need. Should last us a few months.
He spoke proudly. I hope so. Sulin ushered the robot to tow the pallets up the ramp.
Hang on, not so fast,
said Villa, grabbing the silver case from the 3rd pallet. What's that? Like a child with a new toy, Villa said,
I'll show you later.
They followed the robo-train into the hold. Let's unload this lot and get out of here. Villa followed, briefly looking back over his shoulder, wistfully. Less than an hour later, Scorpio had cleared Yadaraf's atmosphere and was on the long way back to Xenon through the cold void of space. Slave, the ship's onboard computer clicked and whirred. Its 2 hemispheres turned one way and the other as it administered Scorpio's ship-wide systems. Sulin had showered off the dust and grime of the salvage yard and was sporting another figure-hugging outfit. She relaxed on one of the lounger chairs she insisted Dorian had kept on the flight deck. They were far more comfortable than the command chairs, especially on long voyages.
So, do you want to see what I bought then?
Villa advanced on Sulin enthusiastically. I have a choice? Then no.
I knew you'd be keen.
He sat on the lounger next to Sulin and put the case on his lap. Unfastening the 2 clasps, he positioned the case so that she could see the contents.
Just look at these. Hypertension wrenches, vibro wands, sonic screwdrivers. Some of this stuff looks very alien, maybe even from beyond Andromeda. I can't wait to try them out.
She looked at the contents, obscured from Villa by the lid, and smiled, cruelly. You've been ripped off.
What?
Villa turned the case on his lap so he could see the contents. His face dropped. What he saw in the spaceport's bar were factory-fresh tools that promised no door or safe was secure. What he saw now on his lap was a case full of iron filings. He poked the stuff with his fingers.
No, no, no!
The lid slammed shut and he threw the case onto the floor. Sulin sighed, laid back on the lounger and began flicking through a copy of Intergalactic Geographic magazine she'd picked up on Yadaraf. Back at the spaceport, a small spacecraft about the shape and size of a single-decker bus, with powerful cylindrical engines on either side towards the aft, rose into the air effortlessly, 4 squat gun turrets, strategically placed to give 360 degrees coverage, proved that this wasn't the property of a regular space traveller. The vehicle's blunt nose pointed skyward. Bobcat was on its way. The single occupant was Jagras Faye, a slim humanoid woman, probably in her 30s, pale-skinned with long lilac hair. She was dressed casually, dark combat trousers and a loose beige top. She sat on a large, comfortable flight chair in the ship's cockpit, punching a few buttons. Green on black text flashed up on one of the many screens laid out before her. It read,
Signal sent.
The ship continued out of Yadaraf's atmosphere into space.
I really don't have the faintest idea where I was going with this.
Villa was finishing a bottle of export-strength wine he'd brought with him from Crotus. He had intended to put the empty, opaque bottle on a control panel, but he missed. It fell to the floor with a dull thud and rolled away, coming to rest against one of the ruggedly built command stations.
It really was quite a funny story, you know.
He hauled himself out of a command chair and walked unsteadily to leave the flight deck. Where do you think you're going?
Bed. I'd invite you to come with me, but I know the answer already.
Sulin rolled her eyes. Bed? We aren't on Xenon base, you idiot. We're in deep space, and the only part of Scorpio that is pressurized is the flight deck, remember?
Ah, good point,
said Villa, falling into a lounge chair ungracefully. Oh. Sulin abandoned trying to read the magazine and went to a command station to keep her mind focused on something other than Villa. Yes, it was tough that he'd been conned, but he didn't need to turn to drink for solace. She returned her attention to the control panel laid out before her. The screens indicated that all was in order. A gurgling, gasping sound startled her. She spun round, blaster instinctively in hand and ready to fire. It was Villa, snoring. She scolded herself for being so jumpy. There was nobody else aboard this antiquated planet hopper, apart from Villa, herself, and of course, Slave. Anything to report, Slave?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mistress. No. All systems are functioning as well as can be.
Can you patch me through to Xenon base?
I'll try, Mistress, but Xenon is still a substantial distance away.
Just try, Sulin said, laying back in her chair and closing her eyes. She hadn't realized how tired she was. Hello, Scorpio. Xenon base receiving. Dana, we're heading back from Yadaraf. Any trouble? No, all routine. I traded the pursuit ship wreckage for parts for Scorpio. I picked up some good stuff. What are you doing? Me? Keeping busy while on watch. It's so boring here. I was toying with the idea of converting one of your clip guns into a kind of rifle, but with all 9 cartridges built in. Could come in very useful. What do you think? Great idea. We've got the tech already. We just need to adapt what we have. It would take some work, but I think it could be done. Dana?
I'm ever so sorry, Mistress, but I fear I have lost the signal. I did say we were so very distant.
All right, Slave, said Sulin, her mind still mulling over Dana's suggestion. If it worked, it could give them a distinct advantage. She got up from the command chair, walked over to a lounger, and lay back. Dim the lights. It wasn't totally dark. Light glowed from the control panels, and Slave was eerily lit, green in its alcove. Sulin was soon asleep. Even Villa's snores couldn't wake her. The silver case lay forgotten on the floor at the back of the flight deck. Inside it, the black metal granules that were Villa's lock-breaking tools began to move and flow over each other, swirling together, linking up, massing to construct something different. The granules were nanobots. Mere minutes later, the case began to buckle and bulge. The nanobots were constructing something larger than the confines of the case. The clasps could no longer hold, and the case broke open, the shells of the casing left bent and out of shape. A matte black sphere, a probe, rose from the warped case. it hovered about 2 yards above the floor for a moment, then silently drifted over to the sleeping forms of Villa and Sulin. Jagras had retired to the snug living quarters of Bobcat and was viewing a holovid. She'd seen it before, a galactic romantic comedy, its familiarity helping her relax. Bleeps sounded from the cockpit. She paused the video and went to the controls. Her perfectly manicured lilac fingernails tapped on buttons and keys. The beeping stopped, and an image appeared on one of the green and black screens. The image showed 2 sleeping humanoids. She tapped more buttons, and grids formed over the faces of the figures. Text began to pop up, along with sums of money and statistics on who was offering the most.
Villa, Restall and Sulin. 2 for the price of 1.
The moment Slave's constant monitoring picked up the broadcast from the probe, it turned the lights on fully. Sulin jumped from the lounger straight into action. She aimed the clip gun, presently loaded with percussion shells, and fired at the probe. The nanobots, equally quick to react, simply rippled out of the way of the speeding projectile. The shell hit a wall and exploded, leaving a smoking hole. Villa, now wide awake, snatched up the broken case from the floor and whacked the floating sphere. Caught unawares, it careered across the flight deck and into the teleport zone. "Slave, teleport now!" snapped Sulin. The probe disappeared from the flight deck into nearby space. Slave, without instruction, fired a salvo of shots at the sphere. It was utterly annihilated.
The probe has been destroyed.
Jagras witnessed the commotion on the green and black screen until the image froze on Villa's grinning face. She tried to regain contact, but without luck. Her attempts were interrupted when she received a call.
Hello? Yes?
Am I to understand I am talking to Jagras Faye, bounty hunter?
Yes.
Oh, good. My people tell me you have located a certain Villa Restall and Sulin.
How does this woman know? She's dangerously well connected,
thought Jagras.
I have a lead, but I can't confirm anything at present.
A lead. Fine. When you confirm the location, or perhaps even apprehend these criminals, you will tell me immediately. I will pay double the bounty offered by any other.
Okay.
My name is Sleer. You have my direct contact details. A chime sounded from the control panel, confirming receipt of the information. Then, the potential client signed off.
Whoa,
Jagras thought. She had really struck gold.
I'd better tip Gurk well next time I see him.
Powering up the engines to maximum, she tore through space to where the probe last broadcast.
Slave, can you play it again?
Oh yes, Master.
The probe's broadcast played on a black and white screen set in the wall of Scorpio's flight deck. Sulin and Villa looked at each other. They were in trouble.
I've never seen anything like it. That stuff replicated tools, then transformed into a fully functional spy probe. It's very advanced tech. I'd love to know where that ruffian got it from.
I tend to agree, but we have more important things to worry about. We and our present location have been reported to someone.
Bounty hunters. We all have prices on our heads, some more than others.
They'd happily sell us out to anyone. Terra Nostra, Federation, anyone. We need to act fast. Bobcat decelerated and came to a standstill. There was nothing obvious to see, just void. Villa and Sulin must have moved on. But that was not a problem. They would have left a trail from their space vehicle's engines. All Jagras had to do was lock onto that trail and follow it. she instructed Bobcat's computer to scan the area for clues. It took the computer about 15 minutes to come up with a result, and it wasn't what Yadaraf expected. She sat back in the flight chair and digested the information on the screen. There was evidence of an explosion, chunks of charred shrapnel, and an erratic wake from a space vehicle containing elements of calcium ore.
Something must have gone wrong,
she thought. She set the computer to follow the wake. She only had the calcium trail to follow. If it led nowhere, she would have to give up and turn back. A dead end. Still, there were plenty of other bounties to hunt down. A faint but rhythmic signal began to sound from the console.
A distress signal,
thought Yadaraf. Villa stumbled from the sea onto the shore of an islet. He wore an orange inflatable life jacket. Bright white lights flashed on each shoulder, and a stubby antenna protruded from the back of the lifesaver. He was soaked to the skin and covered with sand. The islet he found himself on wasn't large. It was about 30 yards at the longest. It was made up of pink sand and a scattering of dark red sea-worn rocks, nothing else. He dropped onto the firm ground and looked out at the sea that stretched out to the horizon in all directions. The sky was grey, and it looked like it was about to rain. He glumly hoped that it wasn't high tide. He woke, finding himself laying face down in the sand. It was raining. He had no idea how much time had passed. What woke him was the sound of engines very nearby. He felt a hand on his shoulder. "Hello," said a female voice. Villa groaned and rolled over to a vision of beauty in this desperate place. Yadaraf Faye stood over him, offering a pale hand to help him up. She wore a long, dark green leather coat over her combats and beige top. Wind blew her long lilac hair across her face.
I must be dreaming.
He took Yadaraf's hand.
"I'm very real,"
she said.
"I picked up your distress signal. You are a very lucky man. How the hell did you get here?"
She asked, looking out at the dismal scene around them.
I was with Sulin, my partner, on our ship. Have you seen her?
Yadaraf shook her head sadly, concealing her knowledge of the name.
We were focused on a security problem when we were broadsided by an asteroid. It came out of nowhere, punched a hole right through the ship.
Her face was stern, and she listened intently.
We limped to the nearest planet, hoping to establish orbit and send a distress call for help. But we didn't make it. Instead...
Villa shook his head in despair. He pointed out to sea. Yadaraf pieced the rest together.
"Out there, at the bottom of the ocean."
Villa nodded.
I got away in an escape pod, just in time. It crashed into the sea. I swam out and ended up here.
"Well, you're safe now."
I can't thank you enough. Look, I've got nothing to offer you, but if we can salvage the wreck, you can have 50% of the profits.
"Let's get on board my ship, out of this rain. Then we can discuss matters."
She strode back to Bobcat, rain clattering against the metal bodywork. Villa followed, agreeing.
Just get me out of here.
Yadaraf turned to help Villa aboard, but he was gone.
"What? No!"
On board Scorpio, Sulin had been listening via the teleport bracelet. A bedraggled, disgruntled Villa materialized in the teleport zone. "Slave, take off now." The sea boiled as Scorpio broke through the surface and rose into the grey, overcast sky. Yadaraf stood in the doorway of Bobcat, looking up in disbelief. She had been completely duped by Villa. She turned and went inside. Scorpio continued to rise into the clouds. "Slave, fire everything at that spacecraft, now!" commanded Sulin. Villa stood, drenched and silent. He had rather liked the woman. As instructed, Slave targeted Bobcat and unleashed a lethal salvo. The islet was engulfed in a fireball. Sulin had waited for the fires on the islet to die down before she teleported down. She needed to ensure that the bounty hunter had not survived. The islet was scorched black, the air was acrid, and the carcass of Bobcat was a mass of twisted metal and melted plastics. Hefting the remains of a chair to one side, Sulin uncovered what was left of Jagras Faye.
Villa, I'm ready for teleport.
She faded from view. Following an uneventful trip back to Xenon base, Sulin and Villa had explained the events of the past few days to the crew.
So the hunter became the hunted?
Said Tarrant, pouring himself a glass of Yadaraf export-strength wine. He sat next to Dana on a couch. She had her feet up on a low table beside Aurak.
Such a shame you had to teleport the spare parts into space and blast them,
said Dana. We had to cook up something pretty fast, but it worked, said Sulin coolly.
You got away with it this time,
said Avon, colder.
You were stereotypically stupid. It's not your fault, it's just who you are. Hey, hang on! How was I to know the tools were phony and made of nanobots?
But Avon had moved on.
Sulin, you shouldn't have allowed Villa to take the case on board Scorpio.
Next time I won't be so lenient, she shrugged.
If there is a next time, you were lucky, and we have one person to thank. Slave. Without its assistance, you would both have been in the hands of bounty hunters. Slave 1.
I hope you enjoyed this audio adaptation of the story Salvage by Paul Vought. Villa was played by Dave Short. The crane operator and Tarrant, Neil Shearer. Avon, Peter Wicks. Narration and all other parts, Chrisi Pashley.